I'd like to do is set the record straight a little bit. This bill has been mischaracterized as changing accounting standards. And late last night, I received correspondence from the American Institute of CPAs, and when I quote from this correspondence, it does not legislate accounting standards. You are dealing with regulatory capital issues. So for everyone who's alleged that this changes accounting standards, it's just not true. If you have any respect for the CPAs, and I think they're the authorities on that issue far and away, everything would be good if out in our districts reality resembled even remotely the picture that you have painted about regulation. Saying that this would preclude you from being able to examine or monitor loans if you couldn't put them on non-accrual basis is just not wrong. It's just not true. You can still monitor it. You could still prosecute for fraud. You could prosecute for abuse. There's nothing that would stop you from doing that at all. And this is not forbearance if we statutorily define performing loan as a historic performing loan. Too many people want to paint this as forbearance so they can tar and feather it in a public arena, and that's just underhanded and dishonest in my humble opinion. I agree with you that accurate reporting is critical, and that's accurate both ways. Again, I think it's atrocious that a regulator can say, well, we're going to put this on non-accrual because we don't think he should be able to make the payments in this economy. You know, maybe they didn't calculate it that the people are eating beans and rice or doing whatever it takes to make their payment. But I think that's pretty sad. You pretty much described the current state of affairs of regulation being fair, balanced, and realistic. And I think it's just the opposite. You know, you've painted a picture that our regulators are all perfect and everything's in perfect order and nothing can be done to help create jobs and stop people from having their property foreclosed on. And I think I just have to disagree with you there. I wonder what testimony of the previous witnesses or the other members of this committee you particularly disagree with or think is misleading or dishonest. Because you speak to us like none of the things they said is true, and I'm inclined to believe it's just the opposite. We know about the hotlines. We know about the ombudsman. If you have a problem with the regulator, call the ombudsman. Well, what happens when a bank calls an ombudsman? He tells the ombudsman how unfairly he's been being treated, and the next call made is the ombudsman calling the regulator saying, guess what, jerk, idiot just called me today to complain about you. There is retribution out there in our homeland. Trust me. Ask any banker; they won't want to come up here and get more retribution, but it's out there. They've testified to that pretty much already. We all know what some of the most fearsome words are to Americans across this great country. I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. And some of the reasons people fear that have been expressed very clearly today here. It's disappointing to me that you fail to acknowledge even remotely that there's even the minutest problem anywhere, and that there's any solution that's being needed other than more regulation, regulate them harder, and that there's an abundance of capital. Why weren't these loans being made that people talked about today if there's an abundance of capital just looking for good loans? It's because they fear the overregulation. How do you close a bank that has significantly greater assets than it does liabilities? We're probably going to run out of time before you have time to answer that. And with the chairman's permission, I'd like to request that you respond to that in writing. Give me a couple scenarios of how you close banks with more assets and liabilities. And don't fail to mention how much of the assets have been put on non-accrual basis so that they couldn't use them to operate the banks. I want to know how many regulators you have. And I'd like to know how many have ever been disciplined for abusing the regulatory authority, if any. What kind of grading you do on the regulators to make sure that they're fair and balanced. I hope that you can work out some way to support this solution or another one internally if we have run out of time. Bottom line is that, if in fact you continue to dispute the findings that have clearly been put forth by our witnesses and members of this committee, it's just personally very disappointing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair is going to make a recommendation, Mr. Posey, that you maybe put those questions